She hit the platform and didn't get up. Not a stumble, not a trip. A full collapse, like something inside her had finally given out after holding on for far too long. Ethan Hale caught her before she hit the boards. Her body weighed almost nothing. Her dress was torn at the shoulder. There was dried blood behind her left ear. And before her eyes closed completely, she grabbed the front of his coat with both hands and pulled herself close enough to whisper, "Please, don't let him find me." Then she was gone. Out cold. In a stranger's arms. If this story already has your heart, hit that subscribe button right now, because we are just getting started. Follow this all the way to the end and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The last train into Red Hollow, Wyoming ran 2 hours late that evening, and by the time it finally groaned to a stop at the edge of town, most of the platform had cleared out. The station keeper had gone home. The baggage boy was asleep against a post, and Ethan Hale stood alone in the cold, with his hat in his hands, trying to remember why he had agreed to any of this in the first place. He was 41 years old, and he felt every single year of it. His foreman, Walt Briggs, had talked him into the mail order arrangement 6 months ago. Not cruelly, Walt was never cruel, but persistently, the way a good man talks another good man back from the edge of something quiet and dangerous. "You're not living out there, Ethan. You're just waiting to die slow," Walt had said one night over coffee. "The ranch needs more than a foreman. You need more than silence," Ethan had argued. Then he had stopped arguing. Then he had filled out the paperwork with the same grim efficiency he used for everything else. He had not expected anything to come of it. He was not the kind of man women chose for warmth. He was not even sure he was the kind of man who deserved it anymore. His wife, Caroline, had been dead for 4 years. The fever had taken her in winter quickly before he had fully understood what was happening. He had stood at her grave in the frozen ground and felt a part of himself get buried right alongside her. Not dramatically, not with weeping or collapse, but quietly, permanently. Like a door swinging shut and the latch catching hard. He had run the ranch since then, worked the land, paid his hands, eaten alone, slept alone, spoken only when necessary. He was surviving. Walt was not wrong about that. So when the letter came 3 months ago from a woman named Lillian Mercer, saying she had seen his advertisement and asking if his offer was still open, Ethan had written back with exactly 14 words. "The offer stands. The ranch is remote. I expect nothing beyond honesty." She had written back with a single line. "Honesty is the one thing I have left." He had not known what to make of that. He still didn't. The train shuddered. The last passengers began stepping off. A family, a traveling salesman, an older couple leaning on each other's arms. And then, nothing. No more passengers. Ethan turned his hat over in his hands, felt the familiar cold settle in his chest. He had half expected this, had told himself not to let it sting. People made promises they couldn't keep. People changed their minds. That was the nature of things. He was about to leave when the train door at the far end opened. A woman stepped out. She was not what he had pictured. Not that he had let himself picture much, but he had imagined someone composed, nervous maybe, but composed. This woman looked like she had been running for 3 days without stopping. She made it 4 steps down the platform before her legs gave out. Ethan moved without thinking. He crossed the platform in long strides and caught her before she hit the boards. She was light, dangerously light, the kind of light that told you someone had not been eating, and she grabbed the front of his coat with both hands, with a grip that was anything but weak. Her knuckles were white. Her eyes were half open and glassy with exhaustion. There was a bruise running along her left jaw that she had tried to cover with the collar of her coat. She found his face, pulled herself close, and whispered those words with everything she had left. "Please, don't let him find me." Then she went limp. For a moment, Ethan just stood there on the empty platform holding a half-conscious stranger, her words still hanging in the cold air around them. "Find me." He looked up at the station. Empty. The train was already groaning back into motion, pulling away into the dark. There was no one else. Just him, this woman, and whatever had chased her all the way to the edge of the country. He made a decision. He was not sure it was a good one. He made it anyway. "I've got you," he said quietly. "You're not going anywhere." Yo. He carried her to his wagon and drove her to Doc Finch's house on the edge of town because he was not a fool, and he was not about to bring an unconscious woman into a ranch house without a doctor's eyes on her first. Harold Finch was 67 years old, had been practicing medicine in Red Hollow for 30 years, and had seen enough of the world's cruelty to be unsurprised by most of it. He took one look at the woman Ethan carried through his door, and his expression went from sleepy to very, very sober. "Put her on the table," Harold said. Ethan did. "Now step back." He did that too. What followed was 20 minutes of quiet, careful examination. Harold worked without commentary, his movements practiced and gentle. Ethan stood against the wall with his arms crossed and his jaw set, and watched the old doctor's face go through several things it was clearly trying not to show. Finally, Harold straightened up. "She's malnourished," he said. "Dehydrated. She has bruising along her ribs, not new but not old either. 4 or 5 days at most. There's an older healed fracture in her left wrist that was never set properly." He paused. "Somebody's been hurting this woman for a long time, Ethan. And recently." Ethan said nothing. "She have any identification on her?" "She had a bag. Left it at the station. I'll go back." "Do that." Harold glanced at the woman on his table, something careful moving through his expression. "She's going to sleep for a good while. When she wakes up, she's going to be frightened. Whatever you say to her in that first minute, make sure it's nothing that sounds like an order." Ethan picked up his hat. "I know how to talk to a person, Harold. I'm not questioning that. I'm saying whoever's been around her lately apparently doesn't." He went back to the station. Her bag was still there, tucked behind the far post, like she had hidden it before getting off the train, thinking ahead even through her exhaustion. That told him something. Inside the bag were 3 folded dresses, a small tin of sewing needles, a hairbrush, a worn Bible with pressed flowers between the pages, and a letter. The letter was addressed to no one. It was not sealed. Ethan stared at it for a long moment. Then he opened it. "To whoever finds me, my name is Lillian Mercer. I am not crazy. I am not a runaway. I am a woman who has been trying to survive a situation most people will not believe because the man responsible for it is charming and wealthy and respected. And I am none of those things anymore. Please do not send me back east. Please do not contact anyone claiming to be my family. If a man named Vincent Mercer comes looking for me, he is not trying to help me. He is the reason I am running. I am not asking for much, just a chance. If you are reading this, you may be my last one. L. M." Ethan folded the letter, put it in his coat pocket, stood in the empty station for a long moment with the cold wind moving around him, and something shifting in his chest that he could not quite name. Then he got back in the wagon and drove to Doc Finch's. She was awake when he returned. She was sitting up on the table with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight, watching the door with the kind of stillness that comes from years of bracing for whatever comes through it next. When Ethan walked in, she did not flinch, but he watched her hands tighten slightly against each other. He stopped just inside the door, didn't move closer. "Miss Mercer," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Her eyes were dark and very careful. There were deep shadows under them. "Mr. Hale," she said. Her voice was quieter than he'd expected, steady in a way that suggested a lot of work had gone into making it so. "You fainted on my platform." "Your platform?" She repeated a small note of something not quite humor, not quite bitterness in the word. "I suppose it is." "How are you feeling?" "Better than I was." "That's not saying much." Something shifted in her expression. Almost a smile. Almost. "No," she said. "It's not." Ethan pulled the letter from his pocket and held it out to her. Found this in your bag. Read it." She looked at the letter, then at him. "You had no right to read that." "You're correct," he said. "I read it anyway, because I needed to understand what I was dealing with before I made any decisions." She took the letter from him slowly, held it in her lap without looking at it. "And what decisions have you made?" "That you're not going back." For a moment, she didn't move. Then something cracked very small and very private behind her eyes. Not crying, she was very far from crying. He could tell the way a person can be so far past the easy relief of tears that they've stopped knowing how to reach for them. "You don't know me," she said. "I know what's in that letter. That letter could be the ravings of a hysterical woman. That's what Vincent would tell you." "Vincent isn't here," Ethan said. "You are." She looked at him for a long time. Then, "Why would you do that? Take on something like this. You don't know what he's capable of." "I'm a man who runs 2,000 acres of Wyoming alone," Ethan said. "I've faced down drought cattle sickness, 3 failed harvests, and a range war that nearly took everything I own. I'm not easy to run off." Another silence. The lamp between them threw quiet light. "I'm not going to be what you hoped for," Lillian said. "Not right away, maybe not for a long time. I don't know how to be a wife right now. I don't know how to be much of anything right now." "I didn't ask you to be a wife," Ethan said. "I asked you to be honest. The rest will sort itself." She looked down at the letter in her hands. When she looked back up, her voice was barely above a whisper. "He's going to come. Let him." "You don't understand." "Then explain it to me," Ethan said. "Not tonight, not right now, when you're ready. But when you are ready, you explain all of it, and I'll listen to every word." He picked up his hat from the hook by the door. "Right now, Doc Finch has a room in the back you can use tonight. Tomorrow, if you want to come to the ranch, the offer still stands. If you don't, I'll take you to the stage stop and put you on whatever coach you choose, no questions asked." He was halfway out the door when her voice stopped him. "Mr. Hale." He turned. "Thank you," she said, "for catching me." He nodded once. "Try to sleep." She came to the ranch the next morning. Ethan had not let himself expect it, which made something in him ease slightly when he heard Walt's voice outside, saying she's here with more surprise in it than Walt usually let through. She came with her bag, and her straight spine, and her dark, careful eyes, and she stood in his kitchen and looked around the room with an expression he could not read, not judgment, not disappointment. Something more like a person taking a measurement they aren't sure how to interpret. "It's clean," she said finally. "I manage. Men who live alone usually don't. I had a good teacher." He poured a second cup of coffee and set it on the table without looking at her. "Kitchen's yours to use however you want. I've got 2 ranch hands. Walt and Pete, they know you're here. They'll leave you alone unless you speak to them first. My bedroom is at the end of the hall. Your room is the one across from it. The lock on the door works. I had Walt check it this morning." She had been moving toward the coffee. She stopped. "You had him check the lock. I figured you'd want to know it worked." Something crossed her face that she covered quickly, but not before he saw it, a flash of something raw and unguarded that was gone before he could name it. She picked up the coffee, sat down at the table, wrapped both hands around the cup. "Tell me about the ranch," she said. So he did. He told her about the land, the 2,000 acres, the herd, the canyon trails that cut the property off from the main road in winter. He told her about the horses, about the well, about the garden that had gone to seed in the back, because he'd never had time for it, and didn't have the patience for it besides. She listened. She asked careful questions, small specific things. How many horses? Where did the water run in summer? How long to ride to the nearest town? The questions of someone making a map in her head, planning exits and routes and contingencies, the way someone does when they have learned the hard way that you always need to know where the door is. He understood that. He didn't say so. Baking. By the end of the first week, 3 things had happened. First, May Whitaker, who ran the diner on Main Street, and had the largest and most permanently activated network of opinion in Red Hollow, had already decided she liked Lillian Mercer. May was 54 years old, had survived 2 husbands and a prairie fire, and a cattle broker, who had cheated her out of $1,800, and her assessment of people was not delivered lightly. She had come out to the ranch on Wednesday with a covered dish of venison stew and 4 jars of preserved peaches, and the absolute refusal to take no for an answer. "I don't need charity," Lillian had said at the door. "This isn't charity, it's dinner," May had said already, walking past her into the kitchen. "Charity is when you feel sorry for someone. I just feel hungry and I made too much. Where do you keep your bowls?" Lillian had stared after her for a moment. Then very quietly she had told her where the bowls were. By the time Ethan came in from the fields that evening, the 2 women were sitting at his kitchen table, with the peaches open and May talking at full volume about the time the county commissioner had tried to tax her bread and what she had told him in response, and Lillian was listening with an expression he had not seen on her face before. She was almost laughing. Not quite, but close. Second, she had discovered the horses. Ethan came out one early morning to find her standing at the fence of the far paddock with her arms crossed on the top rail, watching his gray mare move. She stood so still he almost walked past her. "That one's Dust," he said. "She's beautiful. She's difficult. Doesn't like being told what to do." Lillian glanced at him sideways. "I like her even more." Ethan felt something shift in his chest that he chose not to examine too closely. "You ride." "I used to. When I was young." "A beat." "Before." He did not ask what before meant. "She'll let you near her if you're patient. She can read impatience from 20 feet. If you move slow and don't push, she'll come to you." Lillian looked at the mare. That's good advice for more things than horses. He wasn't sure what to say to that. He went to start his morning work. Third, she found the knife. He came into the kitchen the third evening to find her holding the old Bowie knife he kept in the drawer by the door, the one his father had given him, the one he never used anymore. She held it carefully, blade down, examining it the way a person examines a tool they are trying to understand. "I'm not going to pretend that doesn't make me nervous," he said. She set it back in the drawer slowly. "I sleep better with something nearby." "I know." He paused. "There's a smaller one in the chest in the hall, better balanced, easier to keep close." She looked at him. "I'll get it out for you tonight," he said, and went to wash up for supper. He heard her exhale behind him, a long, slow breath, like something set down that had been carried too far. It was Clara Boone who told Ethan what the town was saying. Clara was a widow of 61 who had outlasted 2 ranchers, a bank collapse, and what she called a spectacular misunderstanding with the territorial judge, and she had no patience for gossip of the vicious kind. But she reported it to Ethan with the grim efficiency of a woman who believed in knowing exactly what you were up against. "George Hadley down at the feed store is telling people she showed up with nothing, and you took her in because you were desperate," Clara said over the fence one afternoon. "Ada Pritchett is saying she's probably a woman of loose character who tricked you. The sheriff, and I'm sorry to say this, Ethan, the sheriff, is saying you might want to be careful because women who arrive in a state like that usually have a complicated story behind them." Ethan adjusted the fence post he was holding and said nothing. "I'm not telling you this to frighten you," Clara said. "I'm telling you because Lillian is going to hear it. Probably already has. And I want to know what you plan to do about it." "Nothing," Ethan said. Clara waited. "Let them talk," he said. "Talk doesn't move fence posts or water cattle or change what's true. She's here. She's safe. That's what matters." Clara studied him for a moment with the expression she usually reserved for things that surprised her. "You're a better man than most of them deserve to know," she said, and walked back to her buckboard. Gag. On the 8th night, Lillian knocked on his bedroom door. He was already awake. He almost always was, those first hours after dark, when the quiet of the ranch pressed in and his mind went places he preferred it not to go. He sat up and said, "Come in," and she opened the door just wide enough to stand in the frame. and in the low lamplight her face was tight and pale. "I had a nightmare," she said. It was a statement, not an apology. "I know," he said. "I heard you." She was quiet a moment. "I didn't scream." "No, but you said his name." A pause. "Twice." She absorbed that. Then, "I'm sorry if I woke you." "You didn't." He looked at her steadily. "Do you want to talk about it?" "No." Then, "Yes. Maybe." She looked at her hands. "I don't know how." "Start with one thing," he said. "Just one. The rest can wait." She was quiet for so long he thought she wasn't going to speak. Then she said very carefully, like a woman setting something down from a very great height. "He told me for so long that I was broken, that I was sick in the mind, that no one else would believe me or want me or stand in a room with me without pity." Her voice stayed level, perfectly painstakingly level. "And I started to believe him. That's the part I can't get past. That I started to believe him." Ethan didn't rush it, didn't fill the silence with reassurance, just let her words sit in the room. "You believed him," he said finally, "because he made sure you had nothing else to believe." She looked up. "That's not the same thing as him being right," Ethan said. For the first time since she had arrived, Lillian Mercer's eyes filled. She didn't cry. She held it back with everything she had, but her jaw trembled once, just once, before she steadied it. "I'll let you sleep," she said. "Lillian." She stopped. "Leave the door open," he said. "If the nightmare comes back, I'm just across the hall." She looked at him for a moment, something searching in her expression, something trying very hard to trust what it was finding. Then she nodded, and walked back across the hall. Ethan lay back down in the dark. He stared at the ceiling and listened to the quiet of the ranch, and felt for the first time in 4 years that the silence of this house meant something different than it used to. He wasn't sure what to do with that. But he wasn't sure he needed to do anything with it yet. Some things he had learned needed time before they could be named. By the end of the second week, Lillian was riding dust. Not comfortably, not confidently, but she was on the horse, moving across the lower pasture in the early morning, with her back straight, and her hands careful on the reins. And Ethan watched from the fence without a word, because she hadn't asked for coaching, and he understood the difference between a person practicing freedom and a person asking to be taught. Dust moved calmly beneath her. The difficult, impatient mare that would throw her head and sidestep for most riders carrying this woman across the open grass like she understood something about her that words couldn't capture. Ethan watched them move. He thought about what Walt had said when he'd ridden out that morning and seen Lillian saddling up alone. "She's going to be all right, boss," Walt had said, quiet and certain. "I can tell." And Ethan, who had stopped believing things would be all right 4 years ago at a winter graveside, found standing at the fence in the early light, watching a bruised and healing woman ride his most difficult horse across the open land, that for the first time in a very long time, he did not immediately dismiss the idea. He was not ready to call it hope, but he was no longer calling it impossible. That was where the real danger started. Not in whatever Vincent Mercer was planning from back east. Not in the town's whispered judgment. Not even in the nightmare that came for Lillian every third night and left her ashen and rigid until morning. The danger was this: that Ethan Hale, who had closed himself up tight as a winter-locked cabin and told himself he was done with wanting anything for himself, was starting to want her to stay. Not as a wife, not as a practical arrangement, just here, in his kitchen, across the hall, on his horse at sunrise, just here. And somewhere east of the canyon trails and the red Wyoming earth, a letter was already traveling. A man in a tailored suit was already making inquiries, already writing letters to sheriffs and magistrates and judges, already coming. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Ethan knew something was wrong the moment Walt handed it to him without saying anything, which was not a thing Walt did. Walt always had something to say. It was practically the man's defining feature. So when he held out the envelope with his mouth closed and his eyes doing something careful, Ethan took it slowly and turned it over in his hands. The return address was a law office in Philadelphia. He opened it at the kitchen table. Lillian was outside with dust. He could hear the horse moving in the paddock, slow and easy, the way she moved when Lillian was nearby. The letter was 3 paragraphs long. It was written in the clean, confident hand of a man who was accustomed to his correspondence producing results. It said that one Lillian Ann Mercer was a ward under the legal protection of her half-brother Vincent Mercer, pursuant to a guardianship decree issued by the Court of Common Pleas in Philadelphia County, dated March of 1886. It said that Miss Mercer had left her place of residence without consent, in a state of mental and emotional instability, and that any person currently harboring her was advised to notify the appropriate authorities of her whereabouts at their earliest opportunity. It said that Vincent Mercer had dispatched a representative to Wyoming Territory to assist in locating his sister and ensuring her safe return. The last paragraph said simply, "Mr. Mercer is a reasonable man. He hopes this matter can be resolved quietly and without incident." Ethan folded the letter, set it face down on the table, sat with his hands flat on the wood for a moment, feeling the grain of it beneath his palms, steady and solid and real. Then he got up, went to the door, and called for Lillian. She came in with a strand of horsehair caught in her sleeve, and her cheeks flushed from the cold air, and she stopped when she saw his face. "What happened?" she said, not a question. He held out the letter. She read it standing up the way she did most things, braced weight forward, ready. He watched her read it twice, watched her jaw set on the second pass. When she put it down on the table, her hands were controlled and deliberate, and she stared at the wall behind him for a moment, like she was doing arithmetic in her head. "He moves fast," she said finally. "He already had the lawyer right before he knew for certain where I was. He knew which direction you were heading. He knows everything." She said it flatly without drama. "He has people everywhere. He's been tracking me since I left Philadelphia." She looked at Ethan directly. "I told you he would come." "You did." "And now?" "Now I know his opening move," Ethan said. "That's useful." She looked at him like she was trying to understand a language she'd never been taught. "You're not afraid of him." "I didn't say that." "You look like you're not. Looks can be managed." He picked up the letter and walked it to the fireplace and put it in the flame. "What I need from you right now is everything. Not the version you gave me before, not the careful one. Everything. Because if he's coming, I need to know exactly what I'm standing against." She watched the letter burn. Then she pulled out a chair and sat down at the table, and for the next hour she told him. She told him about her father, Edmund Mercer, a manufacturer in Philadelphia, who had built his money through hard work and died leaving it to his children before he had time to put proper protections in place. She told him about Vincent, her stepbrother, older by 12 years, charming in the way that some people are charming, which is to say, strategically, selectively, like a tool he picked up and put down, depending on who was in the room. She told him how, after their father's death, Vincent had moved into the house and moved Lillian's life into the space he decided it should occupy, which was very small and very controlled. She told him about the doctor Vincent had hired, a man named Elias Crown, who had examined her for exactly 40 minutes in 1885, and then submitted a report to the court, declaring her psychologically unfit to manage her own affairs. She told him about the night she had tried to leave the first time, and what had happened when Vincent found her at the train station, and how afterward she had not tried again for 8 months, because something in her had needed that time to heal. She told him about the Women's Protection Agency in New York, a small, secretive network of women who helped other women disappear, and how they had gotten word to her through a contact at the Philadelphia Library, and how she had spent 4 months planning a route that would take her far enough and fast enough that Vincent could not catch up before she found somewhere solid to land. She told him about the marriage he was planning. A man named Russell Falk, a business associate from Baltimore, who owed Vincent a very large amount of money and had agreed to accept Lillian as settlement on the debt. She told that last part with no inflection at all, like she was reading from a ledger. Ethan didn't look away from her once, When she finished, the kitchen was very quiet. The fire in the hearth had settled low. Outside, the wind had picked up and was moving across the eaves the way it did in late October with intention. "The guardianship order," Ethan said. "Is it legal?" "It was issued by a real court. Whether it was issued fairly is a different question." She folded her hands on the table. "Dr. Crown was paid very well for his evaluation. I know that because I found the receipt. Vincent keeps meticulous records of everything he buys." "Do you have that receipt?" She hesitated, then reached into the front of her dress and removed a thin envelope from where it had been tucked against her skin. She set it on the table. "I've been carrying that since Philadelphia," she said. Ethan picked it up, opened it carefully. Inside were 3 documents folded to nearly nothing: the receipt for payment to Elias Crown, a letter in Vincent's handwriting that discussed Russell Falk, and the arrangement in language that was almost casual in its ugliness, and a 3rd document he didn't immediately recognize. "What's this one?" "The original will." Her voice dropped a half register. "My father's original will, not the version that was filed with the court." Ethan looked at her. "The one that was filed gave Vincent control of everything until I married," she said. "That one." She nodded at the document. "Leaves the estate divided equally between us, held in trust until I turned 30. No guardianship. No condition of marriage." She met his eyes without blinking. "Someone changed it after he died. I found the original in a locked box in the cellar that Vincent didn't know I had the key to." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. "You've been carrying evidence of fraud in your dress for 2,000 miles, Ethan said. "I couldn't put it in the bag. If he caught me and searched the bag." "I understand." He put the documents back in the envelope and slid them across the table to her. "Keep them exactly where they were." She picked up the envelope and held it for a moment, and he saw something flicker across her face. Not pride, not relief, something older and quieter. The expression of someone who has been carrying something alone for so long that the weight has become part of how they stand. "Ethan," she said, and it was the first time she had used his given name without the formality of Mr. Hale preceding it. Neither of them acknowledged it, but it sat in the room between them, changed and solid. "You should know that helping me puts you at risk. Vincent has money and lawyers and a court order. You have land," Ethan said. 20 years of character in this territory. A doctor who has already examined you and documented your injuries. And 2,000 acres that sit far enough from the main road that a man from Philadelphia is going to have a very unpleasant time finding them quickly. He looked at her steadily. "Don't tell me what I should weigh up. I've already weighed it." She studied him for a long moment. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Don't say because it's right. Tell me the real reason." He thought about that. He wasn't a man who answered questions carelessly. "Because when you stepped off that train and grabbed the front of my coat," he said, "I saw someone who had been fighting alone for so long they'd forgotten there was any other way to do it." He stood and went to refill the coffee. "I know what that looks like. I've been doing it myself for 4 years. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm sorry about your wife." He went still at the stove. Then carefully, he poured the coffee and brought the cups to the table and sat back down. "Walt told you," he said. "May, actually." "Of course." He wrapped his hands around his cup. "Caroline died in '83, fever, fast. And you've been out here alone since." "Running the ranch," he said, which was not exactly an answer, and both of them knew it. "That's not the same thing." "No," he said. "It's not." They sat with that for a moment, not uncomfortably, but carefully, the way 2 people sit when they are both carrying the same kind of loss and have not yet decided how much of it to set on the table between them. Chang. It was May Whitaker who saw the man first. She came out to the ranch that Thursday on the pretense of returning a pie dish. She and Lillian had fallen into a rhythm of cooking together 2 evenings a week, which Ethan had learned to stay out of the way of because the kitchen became a different territory entirely when May was in it, and she came in with her jaw set and her eyes sharp with something that was not pie. "There's a man in town," she said, setting the dish down and looking at Lillian directly. Expensive coat, soft hands, arrived on the noon stage and went straight to Sheriff Calder's office. She paused. "He's been asking questions." Lillian set down what she was holding with a steadiness that Ethan watched with something close to awe. "What kind of questions?" Lillian asked. "Your name, Ethan's name. Whether there was a ranch north of the canyon trails. Whether anyone had seen a woman arrive on the late train 3 weeks ago." May crossed her arms. He introduced himself to Ada Pritchett as an investigator working on behalf of the Mercer family. The name landed in the room like a stone. "Did Ada tell him anything?" Ethan asked. May gave him a look that could have stripped paint. "Ada Pritchett would tell the devil himself where to find a lost handkerchief if he asked politely enough. She told him plenty." Her expression shifted, something fierce and protective moving through it. "But I talked to Clara before I came here, and Clara's already talking to Doc Finch. We're not going to let this happen quietly, Ethan." "I'm not asking you to do anything." "Nobody asked you to save that girl 3 weeks ago either," May said briskly. "Sometimes you do things because they're right, and you move on." She looked at Lillian. "You listen to me. You are not who that letter says you are. And this town, the part of this town worth talking to, knows it." Lillian's throat moved. She nodded once. "Good," May said. "Now, is there coffee?" Ethan rode to town that evening. He found Sheriff Tom Calder at his desk, which was where Tom usually was at that hour, with his feet up and a penny paper in his hands, and the general air of a man who had arranged his life specifically to minimize interruption. Tom Calder was 48 third-generation Wyoming and had been sheriff of Red Hollow for 11 years. He was not corrupt. He was not brave. He was more than anything a man who deeply preferred situations that resolved themselves without requiring him to take a side. The investigator, a man named Horace Greer, who had introduced himself as a licensed agent from the Philadelphia office of the Mercer family's law firm, was sitting in the chair across from Tom's desk, with a leather satchel on his knee, and the expression of a man who considered himself the most competent person in any room he entered. Ethan came in without knocking. "Mr. Hale," Tom said, dropping his feet from the desk. "Tom." Ethan looked at Greer. "You're the one asking about my ranch." Greer had the kind of composure that comes from being paid well to keep it. "Horace Greer. I represent the legal interests of Vincent Mercer of Philadelphia in the matter of—" "I know who you represent," Ethan said. "I got a letter from your employer's law firm last week, so let me save us both some time. Miss Mercer is at my ranch. She is there of her own choosing. She is employed in my household and has been since she arrived, and she is under no obligation to speak with you, travel with you, or acknowledge your employer's claims in any capacity." Greer opened his satchel with the unhurried confidence of a man holding a strong hand. "Mr. Hale, the guardianship decree issued by the Court of Common Pleas is a legally binding document that supersedes That decree was issued in Pennsylvania," Ethan said. "This is Wyoming territory, and I would strongly encourage you to discuss the specific legal weight of a Philadelphia court order out here with someone who has actually read the territorial statutes before you start waving it around like it means something." Tom Calder was looking at his desk. Greer's composure held, but only just. "Mr. Mercer is prepared to be generous in resolving this situation without—" "Miss Mercer is not a situation," Ethan said. "She is a person. She arrived here legally. She has broken no law. And if Mr. Mercer wants to pursue this further, I strongly suggest he do it through proper legal channels rather than sending a man in an expensive coat to ask questions in my town." He put one hand on the desk and leaned forward slightly. "Because I will tell you plainly, the last man who tried to push something past me on my own ground regretted it considerably." He straightened up, looked at Tom. "Tom," he said, "I'd appreciate it if you reviewed Mr. Greer's paperwork carefully before you let him conduct any further business in this county. Make sure everything is properly filed and in order." He picked up his hat. "I believe that's your job." He left before either of them could respond. he told Lillian that evening. She listened to the whole account without interrupting. When he finished, she sat with it for a moment and then said very quietly, "He's not just sending investigators. He's coming himself. That's what this is. He sent Greer to find out how solid the ground is before he steps on it himself." "That's what I think too." "And is it?" she asked. "Solid?" Ethan looked at her across the table. "Solid enough." She exhaled slowly. "Ethan, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." "Always." "Are you doing this because you feel responsible for me? Because I arrived on your platform and you caught me, and now you feel like—" "No." She stopped. "I'm doing it because you deserve to have someone do it," he said. "And because I'm here, and I'm able, and I have no intention of looking the other way." He met her eyes without flinching. "Does that answer your question?" She looked at him for a long time. Then she said very carefully, like a woman who had not said something like this in a very long time, "I'm starting to believe you." "Good," he said, "because it's true." The next morning, Clara Boone came by with a purpose. Clara did not arrive without purpose. It was not in her nature. She sat at the kitchen table with Lillian and a cup of tea and said without preamble, "I want to talk to you about what you plan to do if Vincent Mercer shows up in person." "Fight him," Lillian said. "In court. Any way necessary." Clara nodded slowly. "Doc Finch has been keeping notes," she said. "Detailed notes. Your injuries when you arrived, their nature, their apparent age. He documented everything the night Ethan brought you in." She looked at Lillian carefully. "He told me he'd be willing to sign an affidavit, if it came to that." Something moved through Lillian's face that she didn't quite cover in time. "He doesn't even know me," she said. "He knows what someone looks like when they've been treated the way you've been treated," Clara said simply. "Harold Finch has been putting broken things back together for 30 years. He recognizes the pattern." Lillian pressed her lips together, looked at her hands on the table. "I don't understand why everyone keeps—" She stopped, started again. "I arrived here with nothing. I'm a stranger. I have no claim on any of you. You're here," Clara said. "That's claim enough." She reached across the table and put her hand briefly over Lillian's. "That's how it works in a place like this, child. You show up and you're honest, and you try, that's it. That's all the qualification anyone needs." Lillian stared at the table for a long moment. "He told me for years," she said, her voice barely above a breath, "that no one outside the family would ever take my side. That they would hear his version and see his documents and choose him. That I was too damaged to be believed." "He was wrong," Clara said. "I know that now." Lillian looked up. "But knowing something in your head and knowing it here," she touched her chest, "are two very different things." "Yes," Clara said, "they are." She picked up her tea. "That's why we keep showing up, so your chest catches up with your head." That night, for the first time since arriving, Lillian slept without waking. Ethan heard it in the morning, or rather heard the absence of what he had gotten used to hearing. No sounds from across the hall at 2 or 3 in the morning. No quiet movement. No muffled struggle with sleep. Just silence. The good kind. Walt was already out when Ethan came down. The coffee was made, and he found Lillian standing at the kitchen window with a cup in both hands, looking out at the early light across the pasture. And she looked different than she had the morning before, though he could not have said exactly how or where the difference sat. "You slept," he said. "I did." She turned from the window. There was something in her face that was lighter, not dramatically, not entirely, but perceptibly, the way the sky lightens, just before you can see the sun, a shift that tells you something is coming. The first time since— She stopped, considered. In a very long time. "The ranch has that effect sometimes," he said, and went to pour his coffee. "Ethan." He turned. "I want to learn to shoot," she said. He looked at her steadily. She held his gaze without wavering. "All right," he said. "Today." "After breakfast," he said. "You don't shoot on an empty stomach. You lose your concentration. She almost smiled. It was a real one this time, small and careful, but real, reaching the corners of her eyes the way a real smile does. He turned back to the coffee before she could see what that did to his face, because he was a practical man, and he understood that some things required a certain amount of time before a person knew what to do with them. But he was also an honest man, and he knew with the same certainty he knew land and weather and the temperament of a difficult horse, that whatever was happening in this kitchen between the two of them, it was real, and that Vincent Mercer was going to try to destroy it, and that Ethan was going to have something very significant to say about that. The Wyoming wind moved across the eaves. The coffee steamed. And somewhere east of the canyon trails, a man in a tailored suit was boarding a train. He was no longer sending letters. He was coming himself. And Red Hollow had no idea what was about to walk through its door. Vincent Mercer arrived on a Friday morning, and Red Hollow felt his arrival before it saw him. That was the thing about men like Vincent. They sent their presence ahead of themselves the way a storm sends cold air before the rain. You felt the temperature drop, you felt the shift, and by the time you could name what was happening, it had already begun. Greer had gone back east without the result he came for, but he had not gone back empty-handed. He had gone back with a map of the territory, a list of names, and a detailed accounting of exactly how solid Ethan Hale's ground was. And Vincent Mercer, who had built his life on the premise that every stronghold had a weakness, if you looked carefully enough, had taken that information and made a plan. He did not come alone. He arrived in a private coach with 2 men flanking him. Not rough men, not hired muscle, but lawyers. Young, sharp-faced, carrying leather cases full of documents. He came dressed like a man attending a business meeting in a city which was its own kind of weapon in a frontier town. He came with a manner so polished and so warm that the first 3 people he encountered on Main Street walked away, feeling they had met a reasonable man unfairly burdened by a difficult situation. May Whitaker watched him work the street from behind her diner window. She watched him shake hands with George Hadley. She watched him tip his hat to Ada Pritchett and say something that made the woman put her hand to her mouth in sympathy. She watched him walk into the sheriff's office like a man who owned it. Then she sent her boy to ride to Ethan's ranch. Ethan heard the knock on his door just after noon. He heard the boy's breathless report. He stood with one hand on the doorframe and felt the thing he had been expecting settle over him like weather. He turned to find Lillian standing 3 feet behind him. She had heard every word. Her face had gone very still, not pale, not trembling, but still in the way that bedrock is still, like something that has been tested before and knows its own depth. "He's here," she said. "He is. How long do we have? He'll come out to the ranch today or tomorrow. He'll want to establish his position in town first." Ethan watched her face. "He'll be very polite about it." "He's always very polite," she said. Her voice was flat and precise. "He was polite when he had me locked in my room for 9 days after I tried to leave the first time. He said it was for my protection. He said it with complete sincerity." She looked at Ethan directly. "That's what makes him dangerous. He believes his own story. Then we give him a better one to contend with." "How?" "By making sure everyone in this town has already heard yours first." She went quiet. Then, "You're talking about me telling people. Publicly." "Not yet, but soon." He held her gaze. "Can you do that?" She thought about it, honestly thought about it, which was the kind of person she was. She didn't answer fast to seem brave. She turned it over the way a person turns over something heavy to see what's under it. "I don't know," she said. "Ask me again when the moment comes." Vincent came to the ranch on Saturday morning. He came alone without his lawyers, which was the first thing that surprised Ethan, and the first thing that should have warned him. A man who leaves his weapons at home is either overconfident or carrying something you can't see. Ethan stood on the porch. He did not invite him in. Vincent Mercer was 53 years old and looked 10 years younger. He was lean and straight-backed, and had the kind of face that suggested competence and concern, In equal measure, the face of a man who had learned early that the most powerful thing a person could project was the appearance of reasonableness. He took off his hat when he reached the porch steps. He looked up at Ethan with an expression of exhausted worry. "Mr. Hale," he said, "I appreciate you allowing me to come." "I didn't invite you," Ethan said. "You came." A small, rueful smile. "Fair enough. I've been traveling a long time. I'm sure I'm not at my most gracious." He turned the hat in his hands. "I only want to talk. I'm not here to cause trouble for anyone. Say what you came to say." Vincent nodded slowly as if Ethan's directness was something he had expected and respected. "My sister is unwell. She has been for some time. What she told you, whatever version of events she shared, I understand it feels very real to her. It is real to her. That's the nature of her condition." He looked at the door behind Ethan. "I'm not a villain, Mr. Hale. I'm a brother who has been trying for years to get his sister the care she needs. I'm sure you're a decent man. I'm sure your intentions have been good. But keeping her here isn't helping her. It's delaying treatment she genuinely requires." Ethan looked at him for a long moment. "She told me you'd say something like this?" Vincent blinked once. "I'm sure she did. She told me word for word, almost exactly." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "She said he'll come in person alone, and he'll be exhausted and worried and completely reasonable, and he'll tell you I'm sick, and he'll mean every word of it, because he's told the story so many times he can't tell where the lie ends anymore." He watched something flicker behind Vincent's composed expression. "She's a very perceptive woman." "She is," Vincent said carefully. "She's also very ill." "Where are the bruises from?" Ethan asked. "Pardon." "The healed fracture in her left wrist, the bruising along her ribs, the scar behind her left ear." Ethan kept his voice level. "Doc Finch has documented all of it. So I'm asking you plainly, where did they come from?" For a fraction of a second, just a fraction, something moved behind Vincent's eyes that was not reasonableness, and not worry, and not exhaustion. Something colder. Something that recognized it had been stepped onto ground it had not surveyed. Then the composure sealed back over it, seamlessly. Lillian has always been prone to... "I'm going to stop you there," Ethan said, "because I don't believe the word you're about to use, and I don't want it spoken on my property." He stepped forward one step, not aggressively, just enough to make the geometry of the porch change. "You have a court order from Philadelphia. I'm aware of it. I've been in contact with a territorial lawyer who tells me its jurisdiction in Wyoming is at minimum questionable and at maximum legally meaningless, without a federal judgment to back it up. If you want to pursue this through proper legal channels, I encourage you to do that." He held Vincent's gaze without blinking. "But if you come onto my property again, without an invitation, I will consider it trespassing. We're very clear about property lines out here." Vincent put his hat back on. He was still smiling, but it had changed, thinned out, gone from warm to something that was only the shape of warmth. "You're making an error," he said. "You think you understand the situation. You don't." "Maybe not," Ethan said. "But I understand the woman. And that's enough." Vincent looked at him for a moment longer. Then he turned and walked back to his horse. He didn't look back. Men like Vincent never looked back when they were retreating. It would acknowledge the retreat. Ethan stood on the porch and watched him go, and felt with the certainty of a man who had read weather long enough to trust his bones that the real storm had not started yet. That had been the pressure drop. The cold air moving in. The real weather was still coming. He went inside. Lillian was standing at the kitchen window. She had watched the whole thing. "You didn't let him in," she said. "No." She turned from the window. Her eyes were very bright. "How did he seem?" "Like a man recalculating," Ethan said, "which is more dangerous than a man who thinks he's winning." What Vincent did next was precise and patient, and exactly what Lillian had said he would do. He moved into the Red Hollow Hotel and began having conversations. Not arguments, conversations. over dinner with the county commissioner, over drinks at the saloon with two of the more prominent ranchers in the valley, over coffee in the morning with Sheriff Tom Calder, who was, as previously established, a man who deeply preferred situations that resolved themselves and who was therefore susceptible to a narrative offered by a confident man who asked very little of him. The narrative Vincent offered was consistent and carefully constructed. He did not attack Ethan directly. He did not say Lillian was lying. He said with great sadness and what appeared to be genuine distress that his sister had always been fragile, that she had suffered greatly since their father's death, that the doctors who had treated her were concerned about her tendency to form intense attachments to strangers and to construct elaborate stories around those attachments. He said he feared she had placed an unfair burden on Mr. Hale, who was clearly a good man caught in a difficult situation he didn't fully understand. By Tuesday, George Hadley was telling people at the feed store that it was a tragedy, really, what had happened to that poor Mercer girl. By Wednesday, two of the ranch wives who had been friendly to Lillian stopped returning her waves when she rode through town. By Thursday, Sheriff Tom Calder rode out to the ranch and sat across from Ethan with his hat in his hands and the expression of a man who very much wished he were somewhere else. "He's got a legal document, Ethan," Tom said. "I can't just ignore a legal document." "You can ask your territorial judge whether you're obligated to enforce it," Ethan said, "which I've already done for you. Judge Reardon in Cheyenne says the jurisdiction question is real and needs to be examined before any enforcement action is taken." Tom shifted in his chair. "Mercer's lawyers are saying—" "Tom." Ethan leaned forward. "What are they offering you?" Tom went very still. "I'm not accusing you," Ethan said carefully. "I'm asking, because men like Vincent Mercer don't conduct operations like this without making sure the local authority is comfortable. So I want to know, what did he offer?" Tom's jaw worked. Then, he said if this resolved quietly, there'd be a substantial donation to the county infrastructure fund, new road grading, bridge repair on the South Fork. And if it doesn't resolve quietly, he has a contact at the territorial governor's office. Tom said it like a man admitting something he was ashamed of. He made it clear that contact could make things administratively difficult for the county. Ethan sat back. He felt something cold move through him. Not fear, but a particular kind of anger that was very focused and very quiet, the kind that doesn't heat up, but instead gets precise. "Listen to me very carefully," he said. "That woman has documented evidence of fraud. Not allegations, documents. Evidence of a forged will and a paid medical evaluation. If Vincent Mercer walks out of this territory with Lillian Mercer in tow, and that evidence surfaces later, and it will surface because she's the kind of woman who makes sure things surface, then everyone who helped him will be answering questions about it." He let that sit, including the sheriff who chose a road grading donation over a woman's safety. Tom was very pale. "I'm not telling you what to decide," Ethan said. "I'm telling you what the full picture looks like." Tom stood, picked up his hat, stood with it in his hands for a moment. "You said she has documents," he said. "I did." "Can Judge Reardon see them? I can have copies in Cheyenne by the end of the week." Tom nodded once, slowly. "Give me a few days," he said. He left without another word. Lillian came in from the back hallway, where she had been very carefully not listening through the door, which meant she had heard everything. "He might still side with Vincent," she said. "He might—" Ethan agreed. "But he's thinking about it now instead of just following the money. That's something. Something isn't enough. Not by itself." He looked at her. "Lillian, I need to send those documents to Cheyenne. I need you to let me make copies." She was quiet for a beat. "If Vincent finds out we have them, he's going to find out eventually regardless. Right now, we have the element of surprise. We should use it." She thought about it. Then she reached up and removed the envelope from where it rested and set it on the table between them. "All right," she said. "But I want to be the one who decides when and how they're used." "That was never in question," Ethan said. She looked at him for a moment, and something in her expression shifted, a small, quiet opening, like a window being unlocked from the inside. Not thrown open, Just unlocked. Mike. It was May who told them about the meeting. Vincent had arranged it himself, a town gathering at the church hall framed as an opportunity for community discussion about the situation, which was the kind of phrase that made Ethan's back teeth press together. May arrived at the ranch that evening with her coat still on and her face tight with controlled fury. "He's calling it a community discussion," she said. "About Lillian's welfare. He's invited the whole town." She looked at Lillian. "He's going to make his case publicly, in front of everyone." Lillian sat at the kitchen table and absorbed this with the stillness she brought to things that were worst. "He's good at that," she said. "Public sympathy. He's had years of practice." "Then we go too," May said flatly. "May, we go and we sit in that room, and if he tries to build a wall of public opinion around you, we make sure the people in that room already know who you are before he starts." She looked at Ethan. "How many people in this town actually know her?" "Not know of her, know her," Ethan thought. "You, Clara, Doc Finch, Walt, Pete, the Hendersons? Probably 8 or 10 others who've talked to her at the market or seen her ride. Then we spend the next 48 hours making sure every one of them has heard her story from her own mouth before they walk into that church hall." May said. "Not the letter version, not the careful version, her version, in her own words." Everyone looked at Lillian. Lillian looked at her hands on the table. She was quiet long enough that the lamp between them seemed to flicker. "That's what he wants too, in a way," she said finally. "He wants me afraid of speaking. He's always wanted that. Because he knows if I really speak, the story changes." She looked up. "He controlled me for years by controlling my voice. He decided when I spoke, and what I said, and who was in the room when I said it." Her jaw set. "I am done with that." May leaned forward. "Say that again." "I said I am done with it." "Good." May stood up and buttoned her coat with the efficiency of a woman who had a great deal to accomplish. "Come to the diner tomorrow morning at 7. Clara will be there, and so will Doc Finch and 3 other women I trust. You'll tell your story once clearly, and then they'll each carry it to 10 more people before Thursday." She paused at the door. "Bring the documents, not the originals copies if you can make them, but bring them." She left before anyone could argue. The kitchen was very quiet. "She's magnificent," Lillian said. "She's terrifying," Ethan said. "Those aren't mutually exclusive." For a moment, just a moment, they looked at each other, and something almost like laughter passed between them, warm and real and startling. Not the laughter of people who had forgotten the weight of what was coming, but the laughter of people who were choosing for one breath to set it down. It lasted 3 seconds. Then it was gone. But it had been real.
小破
Wednesday morning, Lillian sat at May's diner table across from 6 women and 1 doctor and told the truth. All of it. Not the careful edited version she had given Ethan in pieces. The full account. The years of it. The systematic erosion of everything she had been before Vincent decided who she was allowed to be. The locked room. The hired doctor. The will. Russell Falk and what her brother had planned to trade her for. The escape, the running the 2,000 miles with a forged medical record following her like a shadow. She kept her voice level. She did not cry. She did not reach for anyone's sympathy. She just told the truth, which was enough. When she finished, the room was silent for a full 10 seconds. Then Doc Finch set his coffee cup down on the table and said with the quiet certainty of a man who has seen too much to be surprised by most of it but is still capable of being moved by it, "I'll have a signed affidavit ready by tomorrow morning." One of the other women, Jenny Henderson, whose husband ran the grain mill, and who was generally considered among the more cautious voices in Red Hollow, said, "What do you need from us?" And Lillian, who had spent years in a world where what she needed from people was for them to leave her alone because needing them only gave someone else leverage over her, looked at Jenny Henderson's steady open face and said carefully, "I need people to not be afraid of him." "We're not afraid of him," Jenny said simply. "We don't know him. He's been here less than a week. We know you." Lillian looked at the table. Her hand, she realized, was flat against the wood, pressing into it slightly, like someone making sure the ground was still there. "He's going to say things at that meeting," she said. "He's going to say them very convincingly. Then we sit in the front row," Clara Boone said with the tone of someone setting the final word on a subject, "and we let him see who he's talking to before he starts." That night, Ethan found Lillian sitting on the porch steps in the dark. He sat beside her without asking. They had gotten past asking by this point. Some silences are navigated the way good riders navigate difficult land, without discussion, just instinct and accumulated trust. "I'm scared," she said. First time she had said it plainly. No context, no qualification. "I know," he said. "Not of him exactly. I've been scared of him for so long it's become familiar." She looked out at the dark above the pasture, all stars and cold air, and the sound of the horses breathing in the paddock. "I'm scared of what happens if this doesn't work. If the documents aren't enough. If the court order holds, and the sheriff enforces it, and all these people who've been kind to me." "Stop," Ethan said, quietly, not harshly. She stopped. "You can plan for failure," he said. "That's practical. But don't live there before it happens. It uses up energy you're going to need." She was quiet for a moment. "What do you do when you're scared?" He thought about it honestly. "I find the next thing I can actually do, and I do that thing. And then the next one. I stay in the work." He looked at the sky. "You can't control everything. You can control the next action." She absorbed that. "The next action," she said, "is that meeting on Thursday." "Yes. And you'll be there. Every second of it." She looked at him, then really looked the way she had on that first night in Doc Finch's lamplight, searching for something she was learning to believe was actually there. And whatever she found seemed to be what she was looking for, because she turned back to the stars, and some of the tension in her shoulders released, not completely, not permanently, but enough. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah. When this is over." She stopped. "When it's over," he said. That was all. But the sentence hung between them, full and unfinished, and neither of them tried to complete it. Some things didn't need finishing yet. They just needed to exist in the space between two people who were both slowly and carefully, and against considerable odds, learning to stop surviving alone. The cold came down off the hills. The horses were quiet. And Thursday was coming, whether they were ready or not. Thursday came in cold and clear, the kind of Wyoming morning that has no sympathy for what you're carrying, and no interest in making things easier. Ethan was up before dawn. He heard Lillian moving across the hall before he was out of bed. Quiet, deliberate sounds. The sounds of a person preparing themselves for something they cannot prepare enough for. He dressed and went downstairs and made coffee, and did not say anything when she came down 15 minutes later, in her best dress, with her hair pinned back and her jaw set like a door. She had decided not to let anyone open. She sat at the table. He put coffee in front of her. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Like I'm about to walk into a room where half the people have already decided who I am," she said. "Some of them have," he said. "Not all." She wrapped both hands around the cup. "He'll be charming. He's always charming. And I'll be standing there, and people will look at me and look at him, and the math will seem so obvious to them. Polished man with lawyers and a court order. Difficult woman with a history of instability." "You're not difficult," Ethan said. She looked at him. "You're precise," he said. "There's a difference. Difficult is what men call women who refuse to be manageable." He drank his coffee. "You're not difficult. You're just not afraid of him the way he needs you to be. That's a different thing entirely." Something in her face steadied. She looked at the table, then back at him. "Walt and Pete are coming," she asked. "Already hitching the wagon. And May and Clara will be there early. Clara got there last night and slept in the church pew to make sure she'd have a front row seat." That's a direct quote from May. Lillian almost laughed. It was the same almost laugh he had seen that night on the porch, real enough to matter, brief enough to hurt a little. "All right," she said. She set the cup down and stood up and smoothed the front of her dress with both hands. "Then let's go." The church hall was full by the time they arrived. Red Hollow did not have a town council in any formal sense, but it had a collective opinion, and that opinion assembled itself on folding chairs and bench seats and standing positions along the back wall, with the efficient thoroughness of a community that understood this particular gathering mattered. Nearly 60 people, almost the whole town. Vincent stood at the front of the room with his 2 lawyers flanking him, and the composed, sorrowful expression of a man who had rehearsed this moment and was confident in his material. May Clara, Doc Finch, and 6 other women occupied the first 2 rows of seats. Jenny Henderson sat beside them with her husband. 3 of the valley's most established ranchers' men, whose opinion carried actual weight in the territory, had positioned themselves along the side wall. Tom Calder stood near the door with his hat in his hands, which was the physical posture of a man who had not yet decided what he was going to do. Ethan walked in with Lillian beside him, and he felt the room shift when they entered. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the way a balance shifts when a weight is added to one side. Heads turned, conversations dropped to whispers. Vincent's eyes found them immediately, and for just a moment, looking at Vincent Mercer, looking at Lillian. Ethan understood something fully that he had only understood partially before. This was not about guardianship. It had never been about guardianship. It was about the fact that Lillian Mercer had left, and that no one had ever left Vincent Mercer before, and that her leaving was a statement about who he was that he could not allow to stand. He watched Vincent look at Lillian, and he saw behind the exhausted brother composure, behind the reasonable man presentation, that cold thing he had glimpsed on the porch. The thing that was not concern, and not love, and not anything close to either. Control. Pure, practiced, furious control. Lillian saw it too. He could tell by the way her chin lifted a fraction of an inch. They sat in the second row beside May. Lillian's shoulder was pressed against Ethan's. He did not move away. Neither did she. Vincent opened by thanking the community for their time. He was gracious and self-deprecating and genuinely impressive. He said he understood this was an imposition. He said he was grateful for how well Red Hollow had cared for his sister in what had clearly been a difficult moment for her. He said it with warmth and just enough sadness to make you feel for him before you could think carefully about what you were feeling. He spent 10 minutes establishing the narrative, the concerned family, the troubled woman, the long history of treatment and worry, the doctors who had tried to help, the court that had intervened out of compassion. He was good. He was, Ethan acknowledged privately, very good. Then he said the thing that changed everything. "My sister," Vincent said, pausing as if what he was about to say pained him, "has a pattern of forming attachments to men who offer her protection. It's a symptom of her condition documented extensively. The last man she attached herself to before Mr. Hale was a doctor in Baltimore who lost his license after her accusations against him proved false." He shook his head slowly. "I am not saying Mr. Hale is a bad man. I believe he acted in good faith. I'm saying that my sister is unwell, and that what looks like a rescue to the people in this room is from the inside a repetition of a very painful cycle." The room was quiet. And then from the second row, a voice said clearly, and without any tremor at all, "That's a lie." Lillian stood up. The room went very still. Ethan had not known she was going to do it. She had not told him she was going to do it. She simply stood, and the quality of her standing straight and direct and entirely without apology did something to the air in the room that no amount of Vincent's careful preparation had accounted for. "The doctor in Baltimore did not lose his license," she said. "He retired. And the reason I left his care had nothing to do with accusations. I left because he told Vincent I was improving, and Vincent did not want me improving. He wanted me dependent." She looked at the room, not at Vincent, at the room, at the 60 people sitting in it. "I want to tell you something, and I'd like you to listen before you decide." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. She told it the way she had told it at May's diner, plainly, directly, without reaching for sympathy. The will. The paid evaluation. Vincent's arrangement with Russell Falk. The locked room. The years of being told she was too broken to be believed. She laid it out with the precision of a woman who had organized it in her mind 1,000 times over and finally had a room large enough for all of it. And then she said, "I have the original will, my father's real will before someone changed it, and I have the receipt showing what Dr. Crown was paid to write that evaluation." She reached into the front of her dress and removed the envelope with steady hands and held it up so the room could see it. "These documents have already been copied and sent to a territorial judge in Cheyenne. Whatever happens in this room today, they exist. They are real. And they are no longer something my brother can take back." She sat down. The room stayed quiet for 3 full seconds. Then it broke into noise all at once. Ethan turned to look at her. She was looking straight ahead, her hands folded in her lap, her breathing controlled. Only her right hand beneath her left was pressed so hard against her own palm that the knuckles had gone white. He put his hand over both of hers. She did not pull away. Sig. Vincent did not lose his composure. That was the thing that made him genuinely frightening. He waited for the noise to settle with the patience of a man who had been here before in various forms, and knew that public emotion was a tide that went out as fast as it came in. Then he looked at Lillian with the expression she had described to Ethan the night they had first talked about him. Patient. Fond. Deeply deliberately sad. "Lillian," he said, and the name in his mouth was a thing Ethan felt physically, a soft precision. The particular way you say a name when you've spent years making someone flinch at the sound of their own identity. "These documents don't," Lillian said. "Just that word. Lillian, if you would just—" "I said don't." She looked at him now, directly at him for the first time since entering the room, and her voice was the same voice she had used on Doc Finch's table the night she arrived. Quiet, steady, working very hard. "Don't say my name like that. Don't use that tone. I know what you're doing, and everyone in this room is about to know what you're doing." Vincent spread his hands slightly, looked at the room. "This is exactly what I meant. You're trying to make me sound unstable," Lillian said. "You've been doing it for years. You do it by being calm, and I do it by reacting, and then everyone looks at the reacting person and decides they're the problem." She took a slow breath. "I'm not reacting. I'm testifying. Those are different things." From the front row, Doc Finch stood up. He was not a tall man, but he had the authority of 30 years and a great deal of careful observation. "I examined this woman the night she arrived in Red Hollow," he said, addressing the room rather than Vincent. "I documented her injuries. If anyone in this room would like to see those records, they are available." He looked at Vincent. "No person in a state of paranoid delusion produces consistent, specific, verifiable documentation of the kind Miss Mercer has provided. In my medical opinion, there is nothing wrong with this woman's mind. There is a great deal wrong with what has been done to her body." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than before. Vincent turned to his lawyers. Something passed between them, too fast, too quiet. Then he looked back at the room and made one more effort. "Mr. Hale," he said, "I want to speak to you man to man. You've done something honorable here, genuinely. But you've been deceived. I think if you looked at the full record—" "I've seen the full record," Ethan said. He didn't stand. He didn't raise his voice. "Yours and hers. And the difference between them is that hers has physical evidence, witness testimony, and a medical examination behind it. Yours has a document written by a man you paid and a court order from a state that has no authority over this territory." He met Vincent's eyes across the room. "You're welcome to pursue this in federal court. I'll look forward to watching your paid doctor explain his fee under oath." The room shifted audibly, the way rooms shift when weight moves from one side to the other, and Vincent felt it. Ethan watched him feel it, watched the calculation behind his eyes recalibrate. Then Tom Calder spoke from the back of the room. "Mr. Mercer," Tom said, and his voice had found something it hadn't had for most of the past week, which was the sound of a decision made. "I've reviewed the territorial statutes with Judge Reardon's office. The guardianship order you hold does not carry automatic enforcement authority in Wyoming territory. If you want it enforced here, you'll need to file a separate petition with the Federal District Court in Cheyenne, which will take a minimum of 60 days and will require full evidentiary review. He paused. In the meantime, Miss Mercer is a free woman on free soil, and I intend to treat her that way. Vincent's jaw moved once, then his composure sealed back in. Very well, he said quietly. We'll pursue the appropriate legal channels. He picked up his hat from the table in front of him. He said nothing further. His lawyers gathered their cases. He walked to the door of the church hall with his back straight and his face controlled, and his hands Ethan noticed because he was watching carefully, pressing very slightly into his palms. He passed Ethan without looking at him. He passed Lillian without looking at her. At the door he stopped. He didn't turn. He spoke to the room with his back to it, which was somehow more unsettling than anything else he had done. "This isn't finished," he said, and then he was gone. The room exhaled. May stood up and said briskly, "All right, who needs coffee?" And that broke the remaining tension the way May always broke things, with complete refusal to let them linger. People moved, people talked. Several of them came to Lillian not in a rush, not in the performative way of a crowd that has been moved and wants to demonstrate it, but one by one quietly to say things that were short and real. Jenny Henderson pressed her hand. The grain mill owner nodded at her without speaking, which from a man like that was considerable. Two women she had never met introduced themselves and said their doors were open. Lillian received all of it with a stillness that was different from the stillness she had carried into the room. The earlier stillness had been armor. This one was something else. Something that looked for the first time like a person who had been holding themselves together from the outside, finally feeling something hold from within. Ethan stood beside her through all of it and let it happen. On the walk back to the wagon, May fell into step on Lillian's other side and said without preamble, "He's going to do something stupid now." "I know," Lillian said. "Cornered men always do." May pulled her coat tighter. "We should talk about what that looks like." "He'll move at night," Lillian said. "He's done it before. When his position gets legally complicated, he stops working legally." She said it with the flat certainty of someone reading a pattern they have studied for years. "He'll try to take me before any federal filing can be made. Make it a fact on the ground that I'm already in his custody, already on a train east. Let the courts sort out what already happened." Ethan said nothing. He was listening. "Then we make sure you're never alone," May said. "That's not possible indefinitely." "It doesn't need to be indefinitely," Ethan said. "It needs to be long enough for Judge Reardon to issue an injunction on the guardianship. I've already filed the request. It should come through within 2 weeks. Lillian looked at him. "You filed that before today." "Yesterday morning." "You didn't tell me." "I didn't want to add one more thing to what you were already carrying." He looked at her steadily. "Was that wrong?" She held his gaze for a moment. "No," she said finally. "It wasn't wrong." She looked ahead at the road. "It's just I'm not used to someone managing things in the background. It's always been me managing everything alone." "I know," he said. "You can keep managing. I'll just also manage. We don't have to divide it." May, walking slightly ahead of them, now made no comment. But Ethan saw her shoulders move in what was almost certainly a suppressed smile. 2 nights later, the sheriff came to the ranch after dark. Ethan opened the door, and Tom Calder stood on the porch, looking like a man who had not slept. "He's gone," Tom said. "Mercer checked out of the hotel this afternoon, paid his bill. Him and his lawyers and the 2 men he brought with him all gone. Stage left at 3 o'clock. Ethan looked at him for a moment. "Which direction?" Tom's expression said everything. "East stage goes to Laramie. From Laramie you can catch the Union Pacific." He paused. "But one of his men, Greer, the one who was here before Greer, didn't get on the stage." Everything in the room went cold. "Are you sure?" Ethan asked. Stable hands saw him take a horse out the back of the livery about an hour after the stage left. Saddlebags, bedroll. Headed north. Tom held his eyes. North is the long way around to the canyon road, Ethan. The road that comes out behind your property. Ethan had already turned from the door. Walt, he called. He was already moving. From upstairs, Lillian's door opened. She appeared at the top of the stairs. She had heard enough. Her face was white, but her voice was level. He sent Greer ahead before he left. He's been planning this since the meeting. Get the rifle from the front cabinet, Ethan said, and the revolver from the hall chest. Bring both down. She moved without hesitation. No freezing, no panic. She was already moving before he finished the sentence. Walt came in from the back, still pulling on his coat. I heard. Pete's already got the horses. I need you on the south fence, Ethan said. If anyone comes from the roadside, I want to know before they reach the yard. Done. Walt went back out. Tom came inside and closed the door. I can stay. I need you to ride to Doc Finch and get him to send a wire to the federal marshal in Laramie tonight, Ethan said. Greer, operating outside his legal authority, gives the marshal grounds to move. I want that wire sent in the next hour. Tom nodded and left. The house was very quiet. Lillian came down the stairs with both weapons. She held the rifle out to Ethan. She kept the revolver. He looked at her holding it. I've been practicing, she said. I know you have. I'm not going to fall apart. I know that too. He took the rifle. Stay near the center of the house, away from the windows. Ethan. He stopped. If Greer gets inside before you get to him. She looked down at the revolver in her hand, then back up at him. I won't let him take me. You understand, whatever happens, I will not go back. He's not going to get inside, Ethan said. But if he does, he held her gaze. Then you do what you have to do, he said, and I'll be right behind you. They came at 2 a.m, not from the north road, from the south, the direction no one had predicted. Walt's voice carried across the yard, a short, sharp call that meant contact south side, and Ethan was out the back door in 4 strides. Rifle up, moving through the cold dark, with the particular calm of a man who has worked this land for 20 years and knows every inch of it by feel. There were 2 of them, not just Greer. Vincent had left a second man. Ethan hadn't known about local hired labor by the look of him, someone paid in cash to make this quiet and fast. The hired man hit the yard first and found Walt, and what followed between them was brief and loud, and ended with the hired man on the ground and Walt breathing hard. Greer came through the back fence with a pistol drawn and got 3 steps into the yard before Ethan said very clearly, "That's far enough." Greer stopped. He could hear by the voice exactly where Ethan was. He could hear by the sound that the rifle was raised. "You're obstructing a legal," Greer started. "There is no legal anything," Ethan said. "There is no court order that covers what you're doing tonight. You rode around the canyon in the dark with a hired man and a pistol to take a woman who doesn't want to go with you. That's not legal process. That's abduction." Greer's pistol came up, and from the doorway of the house, Lillian's voice said, "Put it down." Both men turned. She stood in the doorway with the revolver raised and her feet planted, and her voice carrying across the cold yard without a shake in it. Greer looked at her, then at the gun, then at Ethan with the rifle. He made the calculation. He put the pistol down. "Kick it away," Lillian said. He did. Ethan crossed the yard and picked it up. He looked at Greer, who was breathing hard and reassessing everything he had assumed about this ranch and the people in it. "Get on your horse," Ethan said. "Ride back to Laramie. The federal marshal is going to want to speak with you in the morning, and I would strongly suggest you be findable when he comes looking, because if you're not, the warrant will read a great deal worse than it does right now." Greer looked at Lillian once more. She was still holding the revolver level. Her hands were not shaking. He left. Ethan turned. Walt was upright and unhurt. Pete was coming around the far side of the fence. The yard was still and cold and very quiet. He looked at Lillian in the doorway. She lowered the gun slowly. For a moment she stood with it at her side, and looked at the sky above the yard, at the stars, at the cold Wyoming dark, with an expression he had not seen on her face before in all the weeks she had been here. Not relief, not triumph. Something quieter and much more permanent. The expression of a person who has just discovered in the most direct way possible that the thing they have been most afraid of is survivable, that they are standing on the other side of it, that their legs are still under them. She looked at Ethan. He walked across the yard and stopped in front of her. "You all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said. And then, because she was an honest woman, "I think so. Ask me again in 10 minutes. He almost smiled. "Go inside. I'll be right in." She nodded. Then she stopped one hand on the doorframe and said quietly, "Just for him. I wasn't afraid. That's the thing. When I was standing there, I wasn't afraid." She said it with the mild amazement of someone reporting on a thing they still don't quite believe. "I should have been. He had a gun." "You had one too," Ethan said. "I know, but it wasn't the gun." She looked at him. "It was just I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him specifically." She paused, working it out in real time. "I think I'm not afraid of any of them anymore." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said carefully, because it was true, and because she deserved to hear true things, "You were never as breakable as he told you you were." She pressed her lips together, nodded once, went inside. Ethan stood in the cold yard for a moment, with the stars above him, and the Wyoming dark all around, and the weight of the night settling out of his shoulders 1 degree at a time. In Laramie, a wire was traveling to the federal marshal's office. In Philadelphia, a man named Vincent Mercer was on a train east, and he didn't know yet that the ground behind him was already moving. And in the ranch house across the yard, the lamp was on in the kitchen, and through the window, Ethan could see Lillian at the table still holding the revolver. Her head bowed over it, not in defeat, not in distress, but in the quiet posture of a person who is finally still. The federal marshal arrived in Red Hollow on Monday morning, and he came with the particular unhurried authority of a man who does not need to announce himself because the badge does it for him. His name was Daniel Cord. He was 55, broad-shouldered, and had been a federal officer in Wyoming Territory for 19 years. He had seen land fraud, cattle wars, deed forgery, and every variety of powerful man doing illegal things in the confident belief that distance from a city made him unaccountable. He was not impressed by any of it anymore, but he was still moved to do something about it, which was the more important quality. He went to the ranch first. Ethan met him at the door. Lillian stood behind him, which was different from where she had stood a month ago. She had stood behind him then because she was afraid of what was coming through the door. She stood behind him now because she was choosing the order of things, and she wanted to hear the marshal's opening before she decided how much she was ready to say. "Mr. Hale," Cord said, shaking his hand. "Miss Mercer." He looked at her directly. "I've read the wire from Doc Finch and reviewed the documents your attorney forwarded to Judge Reardon's office. I have some questions, and then I have some things to tell you." He paused. "In that order, if you're willing." "Come in," Lillian said. She said it before Ethan did. That was also different. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she had first told Ethan everything. The same table where the letter from Vincent's lawyer had burned in the fireplace, and Daniel Cord opened his leather case and asked his questions with the precision of a man who already knew most of the answers and was filling in the remaining gaps. He asked about the night of the attempted abduction, about Greer, about what was said and done. He asked about the documents, where she had found them, how long she had carried them, whether anyone else had handled them. He asked about the original will and who else had known of its existence. Lillian answered everything, completely without hedging, without the careful editing she had once applied to her own story as a matter of survival. She answered the way a woman answers when she is done managing what people are allowed to know about her. When she finished, Cord closed his case and looked at both of them. "Greer is in federal custody in Laramie," he said. "He retained a lawyer within 6 hours of his arrest, which tells you something about how well Vincent Mercer prepared his people for the possibility of things going wrong." He folded his hands on the table. The lawyer's retainer was paid by a bank draft from Mercer's Philadelphia account. We have the paperwork. Which means Vincent authorized the abduction attempt, Ethan said. Which means Vincent authorized the abduction attempt, Cord confirmed. Greer is looking at criminal charges for what happened in your yard. He's already indicated willingness to provide testimony in exchange for consideration. He looked at Lillian. And the documents you've provided, the original will and the payment receipt for the medical evaluation, have been examined by 2 independent forensic specialists in Cheyenne. Lillian's hands went still on the table. The will is authentic, Cord said. The document filed with the Philadelphia court is not. The forensic experts found evidence of alteration in the ink composition on 3 key clauses. He paused. Miss Mercer, what your brother did constitutes probate fraud. That's a federal matter. It was the moment it crossed state lines. The kitchen was completely quiet. There's more, Cord said. He said it with the careful tone of someone who has learned to place difficult information gently. In examining the Mercer family accounts as part of the fraud investigation, we found that your inheritance, the portion set aside for you under the original will, has been drawn on extensively over the past 4 years. The funds were used to service debt your brother accumulated through a series of failed investments, and in 2 cases, outright fraudulent business arrangements. He met her eyes. Not all of it can be recovered, but a significant portion of the estate's assets, property holdings, accounts your brother couldn't liquidate without raising questions, those are recoverable. A federal receiver has already been appointed. Lillian looked at the table for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, He spent it. He used the money to cover what he'd done with the money. Yes. She exhaled slowly. Of course he did. She looked up. And Vincent himself. A warrant has been issued, Cord said. He was arrested at his Philadelphia residence this morning. Charges include probate fraud, conspiracy to commit abduction, and a 3rd charge relating to the original guardianship filing, specifically the knowing submission of a fraudulent medical evaluation to the court. He paused. The doctor who signed that evaluation, Elias Crown, surrendered his medical license 2 days ago and has agreed to testify. The silence that followed was the kind that doesn't need to be filled. Ethan sat with it. Lillian sat with it. Cord, who understood this kind of silence, let it be. Then Lillian said something that was not dramatic and not performed and not what anyone in a less honest moment might have said. She said, I thought this day would feel different. Different how? Cord asked. Larger, she said. I thought it would feel like an ending, like a door closing. She turned her coffee cup slowly in her hands. It just feels like the next morning. That's usually how it works, Cord said. The dramatic part is getting to the morning. The morning itself is just a morning. Ethan looked at her across the table, and she looked at him. And what passed between them in that moment needed no words, because it had been building through every morning of the last 6 weeks. Every cup of coffee set down without being asked for. Every door with a working lock. Every night she slept through, and every night she didn't. Every time he had said, I'm here, without saying it. There will be proceedings, Cord said, gathering his case. You'll need to appear in Philadelphia at some point for the probate review. I can give you 30 days before you're formally required. He stood. But the guardianship order is void. As of this morning, in every legal jurisdiction that matters, Lillian Ann Mercer is a free woman with full authority over her own life and her own name. He held out his hand. I'm glad it worked out, Miss Mercer. She shook it. Her grip was steady. Thank you, Marshal. He nodded at Ethan. Mr. Hale. And then he put on his hat and walked out into the Wyoming morning. Ethan and Lillian sat at the table after he left. The coffee had gone cold. Outside, Walt was moving the horses to the far pasture, his voice carrying across the yard in the usual morning rhythm. It's over, Lillian said, testing the words, seeing how they fit. Most of it, Ethan said. The part that was chasing me. Yes. She looked at the door Cord had just walked out of. I keep waiting for the catch. For the thing I missed. for someone to knock on the door and say, "Actually, there's a problem." "There might be," Ethan said. "Not from Vincent. But the world isn't finished having problems." He looked at her steadily. "That's just being alive." She almost laughed. "That's not comforting. It's not supposed to be comforting. It's supposed to be true." He picked up both their cups and went to the stove. The difference between now and 6 weeks ago isn't that problems stopped existing. It's that you're not facing them alone. She watched him refill the coffee, watched him carry both cups back and set hers down in front of her with the same unhurried ease he had done every morning since she arrived, as if the gesture had always been part of his routine, as if she had always been part of his morning. "Ethan," she said. He sat down. "I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Always," he said. "When you first wrote back to me," she began. 14 words, he said. 14 words. When you wrote those 14 words, what were you expecting?" He thought about it, the way he thought about everything honestly without rushing it. "I was expecting someone practical," he said finally. "A working arrangement. Someone who needed a place and could help run a household and would leave me to my silences." He looked at his cup. "I wasn't expecting anything real." And now, he looked up at her. The morning light from the window was on her face, and she was looking at him with those dark, careful eyes that weren't careful the way they had been on that first night, weren't calculating exits and reading threat levels. They were just looking at him, just seeing him. "Now," he said, "I'm expecting everything." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she put her hand on the table, palm up, not reaching, just placing it there, offering. He put his hand over hers. May Whitaker cried when they told her. This surprised everyone, including May, who had a reputation to maintain and quickly covered it by telling Lillian that the dressmaking shop idea was overdue and she should open it as soon as possible, and she, May, would personally intimidate anyone in town who failed to patronize it. Clara Boone did not cry. She said, "Well, it's about time," in the tone of someone who had seen this coming since approximately the second week, and then she invited them both to dinner and spent the evening talking about everything except what had happened, which was exactly what they needed. Doc Finch shook Ethan's hand and said, "I wrote up a full medical record. She should keep it. It's thorough." Then he looked at Lillian and said, "You're going to be fine, you know. Not in the vague, wishful sense. In the actual, documented prognostic sense. You're going to be fine." Walt, who was the least complicated person in any room he entered, said, "Good. Now can we get back to fixing the south fence? It's been 6 weeks." The dressmaking shop opened on the first day of December. Lillian had found the space herself, a room above the milliner's on Main Street, with good light and room for 3 tables. She had negotiated the rent herself in her own name, with her own portion of the first released funds from the estate receivership. She had furnished it with a sewing machine May had in storage, and 2 she ordered from a catalog in Cheyenne, and she had hung a small hand-lettered sign in the window that said simply, "Mercer Dressmaking." All welcome. What she did not advertise, and what did not appear on any sign, was the other thing the shop became. It started with a woman named Ruth Gallagher, who came in one afternoon in January, on the pretense of needing a hem fixed, and stayed for 2 hours, because she did not want to go home. Lillian gave her tea, and let her talk, and didn't push, and at the end of the 2 hours, Ruth said something that Lillian recognized the way you recognize the shape of your own handwriting. "I don't know who to tell," Ruth said. "I don't know if anyone would believe me." Lillian looked at her across the work table. "I'll believe you," she said. "Start anywhere." Ruth started. And Lillian listened the way she wished someone had listened to her, without flinching, without rushing to fix it, without making her feel like a problem to be managed. Just listened. By February, there were 3 women who came to the shop for reasons that had nothing to do with dressmaking. By March, there were 7. Lillian wrote letters on their behalf to the Women's Protection Network in New York, the same network that had helped her escape. She connected women with Doc Finch, who had, as it turned out, been quietly doing similar work for years, and was grateful for someone willing to do it more openly. She directed 2 women to safe houses in Laramie when they needed to move fast. She helped one woman draft a letter to her family in Indiana that was honest about why she was leaving her husband, which was harder and more important than any of the legal maneuvering. When Clara Boone found out the full extent of what was happening in the room above the milliners, she sat down at Lillian's work table and said, "What do you need?" "Money for train tickets when women have to move quickly," Lillian said, "and someone who can vouch for their character when they land somewhere new." "Done," Clara said. She stood up. "And one more thing." She looked at Lillian steadily. "You know this is going to make certain people uncomfortable." "I know," Lillian said. "And—" Lillian smoothed the fabric on her work table. "And I've been made uncomfortable by certain people for most of my adult life," she said. "I think it's their turn." Clara smiled, her real one, not the measured one she kept for public occasions. "I like you very much," she said. "I thought you should know." Spring came in fast that year, the way Wyoming springs sometimes did. Suddenly, after a winter that had given no indication of being finished, the ground simply decided it was time, and everything opened at once. Ethan expanded the ranch. He had been thinking about it through the winter, thinking about the east pasture, which had the best shelter from the canyon wind, and the old line cabin at the back of the property that hadn't been used in years. He said nothing about it to anyone for several weeks, until one evening when he and Lillian were sitting on the porch after supper, and she asked him what he was working out in his head, because he'd had the same expression for 3 days. He told her he wanted to convert the east pasture into a proper yard with shelter and a kitchen garden, and he wanted to repair the line cabin and make it habitable, and he wanted the ranch to be known as a place where women and children could come when they needed somewhere safe before they could get somewhere permanent. Lillian was quiet for a long time. "You came up with this yourself," she said. "I've been watching what you've built above the milliners," he said. "It needs somewhere to send people when they need more than a conversation." "Ethan." Her voice was doing something careful. "You know what that means. For the ranch. For your reputation." "I know what it means for the ranch," he said. "I don't care much about the reputation part." She looked at the dark above the canyon. "Walt and Pete, both on board. Walt said, and this is a direct quote, 'It's about time this place was good for something other than cattle.'" She pressed her lips together, failed to hold back the thing that was almost a smile, and then became finally completely a real one. Full and unguarded, and reaching all the way to her eyes, the way it did sometimes now, more and more. Now the way spring comes, not all at once, but undeniably, until one day you look around and realize the cold has stopped being the baseline and warmth has taken its place without you marking the exact moment of change. "I'll draw up the plans for the cabin," she said. "I was hoping you'd say that." "I have opinions about the kitchen garden." "I assumed." "Strong ones." "Naturally." She looked at him. He looked at her. The canyon wind moved between them and around them the way it always had, the way it would keep doing long after tonight. Long after all the fear and the running and the legal documents and the cold yard confrontations had become part of a story they would tell to daughters who had never known anything but safety. "Are we all right?" she asked, not asking about tonight, asking about everything. "We are," he said, the same way he said things he knew to be true, without decoration, just the fact of it set down plainly. "Good," she said, and leaned her shoulder into his the way she had learned to, not leaning for support. Just leaning because she could, because he was there, because she had finally completely understood the difference between needing someone and choosing them, and had discovered to her great relief and her great joy that she was doing the second one. In Philadelphia, the trial of Vincent Mercer lasted 11 days and produced a conviction on 3 counts. The sentence was 7 years. Dr. Elias Crown's medical license was permanently revoked. Horace Greer served 8 months and was released, and was never heard from in Wyoming territory again. The probate court restored Lillian's portion of the estate at 63 cents on the dollar. Not everything that had been taken, but more than enough to be substantial. She put the majority of it in a trust administered jointly with the Women's Network in New York. The rest she kept for train tickets. The guardianship order was struck from the court record as if it had never existed, because in every way that mattered, it hadn't. The following spring, when the canyon trails ran with snowmelt and the east pasture was full with the sound of children who had arrived with bruises and silence and were slowly becoming loud again, in the particular joyful way that children become loud when they are safe. That spring. One early morning, Lillian sat on the porch of the main house with her newborn daughter against her chest and watched Ethan come across the yard. He had been out since before sunrise. He came back the way he always did, without announcement, unhurried, carrying the morning with him in the dust on his boots and the cold on his coat. He stopped at the porch steps and looked at Lillian and the baby she was holding with an expression that she had learned to read over the past year, the one he kept for things that moved him too much for words to be the right tool. He sat down beside her. The baby made a small sound. He put one finger out, and she grabbed it with her whole fist, which was the thing babies do when they are new, and the world is still entirely made of sensation, and no fear has been learned yet. "She's strong," he said. "She is," Lillian said. "She gets that from her father." He looked at her. "And from her mother," she added. "But mostly from you." He shook his head slightly. He would never entirely accept the credit for things which was one of the things she had come to love about him, that he was a man who genuinely did not understand how remarkable he was, not because he lacked self-awareness, but because he had simply never considered being otherwise. From inside the main house came the sound of voices, May's particular carrying laugh, Clara's dry response, and somewhere below it, the sound of a woman who had arrived 3 days ago from the North Road with a split lip and a child on her hip, now sitting at the kitchen table talking. Just talking. Using her voice because it was hers again. Ethan listened to the sound of the house. His house, which was not his house anymore, but their house, and not entirely theirs either, but something larger. A place that had learned a purpose beyond what any single person's grief had imagined for it. He put his arm around Lillian. She leaned into him. The morning light came off the canyon walls the way it always did, warm and specific, the particular color of something that had been earned. Their daughter slept between them, one fist still wrapped around her father's finger, with the absolute certainty of a child who has never had any reason to believe the world would not hold her. Lillian looked out at the ranch, the yard, the horses, the east pasture, with its kitchen garden and repaired cabin. The canyon road, where everything had started on one late train evening that felt like another life, and also like yesterday. She thought about the woman who had stepped off that train. She thought about what that woman had believed she deserved. She thought about what she knew now, a year and a season, and a whole life later. Sitting on this porch in this morning with this man and this child, and these voices filling up a house that had once been full of silence. And she held her daughter a little closer, and she breathed the cold, warm canyon air, and she knew with the same certainty the bedrock has the certainty that does not need to be rehearsed or defended or proven to anyone exactly who she was and exactly where she belonged. Some women spend their whole lives waiting to be chosen. Lillian Mercer had learned the only thing that ever actually mattered, how to choose herself first, and everything that came after the man, the child, the house full of voices, the women who arrived by train and found a door that opened all of it. Every last piece of it had grown from that one choice made on a cold platform in a small Wyoming town the night she stopped running and decided to stand still and be found. She was home. Not the home she came from. The home she had built word by word, morning by morning, truth by truth, out of the wreckage of everything she had survived. And nobody, not ever again, would ask her to do anything less than live.